The interview Bill Gates gave to the House Oversight Committee is now public. I'm Alex Miller, and I'm covering all things Jeffrey Epstein, so make sure you hit the follow button. Let's get into it. He was asked specifically if he ever witnessed any sexual activity or abuse on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. We knew he flew on it. He said no. He was asked if he ever discussed sexual behavior of any kind with Jeffrey Epstein or witnessed him engaging in sexual contact of any kind or getting a massage from a young woman. He said no to all of those questions. He was also asked about whether he ever engaged in sexual contact in front of Jeffrey Epstein or with a person introduced by Jeffrey Epstein, or whether he was ever offered young girls or women for sex, or whether he even got massages arranged by Jeffrey Epstein. All of these he says no to. Remember, this is not under oath technically, but there is a penalty for lying. It says he never saw anything there. He never even went to Epstein's Palm Beach house. Okay, let's get into the affairs. He tries only to talk about 2 women, though we later learn that there are actually 3. He says they're both Russian women and that one was in her 20s and the other one was in her 30s. Now, you might remember the file that has been very much in focus is this email that Epstein apparently sent to himself, but it looked like it was actually supposed to be addressed to Bill Gates, talking specifically about Gates contracting an STD. So he was asked about this. If he ever contracted one from those 2, he said no, not for any of them. Now, we know from his opening statement that he had said essentially he was being blackmailed by Epstein, but there was this other part where they talk about one of the women he had an affair with, Mila Antonova, and essentially it sounds like Epstein had been asking for payments for expenses that he was covering for her. But again, Gates has testified that he was not introduced by Epstein to any of the women he had affairs with. But you can see right here, he said that he viewed it as a tactic to re-engage. These are the 2 women that he says for the bulk of the interview that he had an affair with. Now, there were discussions about some emails that had been traded back and forth, and so he was asked about his marital dispute with then-wife Melinda French Gates. In this, he says that it wasn't a marital dispute, told Melinda about the affairs, and it was very distressing to her, but at the time, there was no explicit mention of getting divorced. And he also acknowledges that it took him several years to tell Melinda Gates about these affairs. He does acknowledge this 3rd affair about 76 pages in, and he said this is something that he had already discussed with Melinda at some point. I just thought it was very interesting because he kept saying that none of these women had any connection to Jeffrey Epstein, and obviously there were a lot of questions from members of Congress about it, but they were asking him again that you're aware of, how do you know? And he said, I guess I'll never know because he's dead. He does acknowledge at one point in the transcript that he knew that he had been convicted of a sexual-related crime, but he doesn't really say how much more he really knew about it. But he says he never saw anything, he didn't participate in anything himself, consistent denials across the board, and then of course we learned about all of these affairs that he was having and how Epstein and others knew about them and were kind of gauging whether or not it could be used against him in the future.